Can you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, there's very good news. The good news is that coronaviruses circulate 4 years out of every 10 years. So all of us, 40% of the flus are coronaviruses, 30% of the common cold is coronaviruses. So what people are not taught, and the doctors are not taught, is that you have an immune system. And how you know you have, if you remember when you had chickenpox, you would get chickenpox and you might be unwell and have spots or whatever for a week or 2 weeks. But what that is why you suddenly get better and then you are immune for chickenpox for your life, is that your immune system recognizes the virus and it kicks in, you feel unwell. And why you feel unwell is that to get rid of the virus, your body has to raise your temperature. And that raising of the temperature makes you feel exhausted. And it makes you slow down, lie down, sleep. So it gives the energy of the immune system to defeat the virus, clear it, and then within 2 weeks or so you'll recover. And you'll be fine, and your immune system, if you come across chickenpox again, will remember it, and you won't get the symptoms, okay? And you'll be fine. So what happens with coronaviruses is it's a virus that causes the flu, so 4 out of 10 years. They circulate the globe, and people come across coronaviruses, every second year, and between 85 to 98% of people, no matter what age you are, won't have any symptoms. Because your immune system will recognize 1 or 2 viruses, will kick it out even when it's on the surface. So the virus won't get in your body, you won't even make an antibody, you won't even have symptoms. So someone like that, which is between 85% and 98% of the population, will be negative on all these tests because the virus didn't get into their body, they didn't make antibodies. But the main thing is the whole population see these viruses every winter, every single person on the planet. And after 3 or 4 weeks in a region, everyone will have either have had no symptoms, 9 out of 10, or the people who get illness are usually the people that make the antibodies, the 1 in 50 or the 1 in 10. And they will have antibodies, they might have had flu symptoms, and they'll be well. So what we have is we have an immune system. So this year we had influenza B circulating in December 2019. We had influenza A over Christmas, and we had coronavirus around January, February, March. Okay? So you might have remembered, I actually got all 3 of them. Okay, I got all 3 of flus. You might remember being sick before Christmas in January. I certainly was. And the symptoms of it, which wasn't spoken about at the time, were like you had flu-like symptoms. So I would be the 1 in 10, would say, people who actually got symptoms. And I was stressed because I was standing for election and trying to work and pushing back on all this stuff. So I got symptoms. So you would be a little bit breathless. You had a cough. But these symptoms happen over with flu it comes on quite quickly, as you know. And then if you don't recover and you get breathless, that whole process takes a week, So the good news is, though, that, and if I had known, and that's why I came out, and this is important for other flu seasons, whether it's influenza virus or coronavirus, is that if you have good nutrition and you drink water and you sleep, you will actually help your immune system to attack the flu virus, right? That's common sense. But if you have poor nutrition, so the most important thing is nutrition, but then you can supplement with vitamin D, C, and zinc, okay? So then if you do that over the winter season, especially zinc, that actually helps the immune system get rid of the virus. If you don't have zinc, your immune system doesn't work very well. But then there are other treatments like inhaled steroids, and what they do is they just help your immune system attack it. So the treatments like vitamin D, C, and zinc, your own immune system will clear it. So you will have built up an immune response. And the beauty of that is when you see the coronavirus again, your immune system is boosted, so you'll have less symptoms, And so what they are acting as if we don't have an immune system. And what I'm saying is use it like the analogy of chickenpox, right? Where you get sick for a few weeks and you're essentially immune for life. And so each time there's a circulating coronavirus, your immune system is very quickly going, oh, that's a coronavirus. It kicks in, you may not have any symptoms, you have flu-like symptoms, and you're well. But the most important thing is for coronaviruses, which I'm saying these guys have picked the wrong virus to launch a pandemic, right? the same as carbon dioxide is the wrong molecule to do all this global warming thing. They didn't actually know the chemistry of it. So in coronavirus, it's seasonal, right? So the main impact of it is just between December and April. But in every region, people build immunity in about 6 weeks. You know, so in China, it was actually, we say it started December, January, February, but Nobel Prize winner Michael Levitt said on the 28th of January 2020 that there would be a precipitous drop. The peak in China would be in February, and there would be no deaths in China from the 18th of March. He forecast that, right, looking at the data as a Nobel Prize winner, and he was exactly right. There was no deaths in China. The peak was in February. So that's to tell you these ones are seasonal. And why? And so in Ireland it came, you know, February, March. And when I did my Dave Cullen interview, if anybody saw it, there was a graph with 3 little peaks. And so one was a precipitous drop. But the first peak was influenza B in December. Second peak, influenza A. The third peak was COVID-19. But that's to remind you that flu is seasonal. And within a month in December, it meant that in the whole world, everybody got the flu. You know, it actually goes the way the Earth circulates: China, Europe, America, and each region will have, everyone will get it within about 5 weeks. But what they're not telling you is, why is no one sick after 5 weeks of influenza A in December? Is everyone has built immunity. So if you're still alive in January, every single person in the world has developed an immune response to influenza A, and we're all well. So what they're doing now is like if I set up a company, which I said on the radio station, and I started getting millions from the government to test people for influenza A. Now, right? We had it all. It was a flu in December. Everyone had it in the world. And if people who were dying of Alzheimer's, that I was testing them for influenza A, and the doctors were reporting the deaths, like everyone in Ireland would have come across it, about 1 in 10 would have made antibodies. 1 in 10 or 1 in 50 might be PCR positive, the rest aren't. And I started reporting cases of influenza A, a flu in December, that everyone had and everyone recovered from. And there's now this big media storm reporting cases of influenza A, when actually, guys, it was a flu, a winter flu. It peaked in December. It's gone now. We're all immune. So they are doing the exact same thing for COVID-19. It's a seasonal coronavirus. About 1 in 10 people had the symptoms. We're all immune. So they are now testing people who had it, were exposed to it, and they just have fragments of the RNA. But the testing, which we don't need to go into, may actually be positive if you have a common cold, you know, or another circulating virus. Just because they've had this media storm, like the way we had 2 influenzas, there could be another circulating coronavirus. So all the testing and cases, it's over. It's really a flu. And so I knew in March, so you can search if you want to write down, the World Health Organization, the 11th of March 2020, when the Director General announced the pandemic. I knew straight away, you can read the second line, straight away I knew, he said, it had already gone to 114 countries. That means these viruses circulate the world, right? The governments are not going to stop them. People travel on airplanes, right? In the 11th of March, it had gone to 114 countries. That's just where they tested it. It had obviously gone in the whole world. But the number of deaths in December, January, February, March, when they declared the pandemic, in the whole world, 7,000 million people, was 4,291. So you had a chance of dying from COVID-19 of 1 in 1.8 million. Right. So you have a chance like the people, so 56 people were dying every day of COVID-19. So every day in the world, 3,000 people die of TB. Every day. So in the whole world, in 4 months, it was the equivalent of 1 day. TB is an infectious disease, right? So you had a chance of 1 in 1.8 million of dying, whereas 1 in 3 people die of cancer, right, in every family, right? 1 in 3 people. So that it actually, there was no reason to call a pandemic. And it turns out in SARS, the previous one, so how do you know as well, like, should this be a pandemic? So the famous SARS, if you remember, SARS, in 2002, 2003, which they were, flagging as a pandemic. In the whole world, there were 6 billion people at the time, 6,000 million people. In the whole world, Guess how many people? I know it's hard to guess, but obviously all deaths are tragic as well. I'm not undermining. 150,000 people die every day. But in the whole season in 2002, 2003, 774 people died in the whole world from SARS. So you had a chance of dying back then of 1 in 1.8 million people. Right? This is not. 700 people died. That's like a few hours of one day of TB. The World Health Organization is calling, and that's all on the World Health Organization website, the 774 people. There was one person that died in Ireland back then, one, okay? This is not so, and okay, so it's not, these coronaviruses are rare. They're not something to close down the world for. They are not infectious diseases. And if you were going to close it down, there's like 50 times more people die of the infectious disease, just TB every day. 20 more people die of other kind of infectious flu-like symptoms every day. So there was no reason to do it. But the really good news is we have treatments. So it turns out that vitamin D can actually prevent about 85% of the deaths now if you get high-dose vitamin C, vitamin D. Okay? So say next winter, if you have a bad flu, you can actually ask your doctor to get higher doses of vitamins C and D that will protect you. But there's also, you can ask for inhaled steroids, which are well proven. There's also some interferon, but of course there is the drug hydroxychloroquine, right? And hydroxychloroquine only works with zinc. It's a zinc ionophore, so it helps zinc work. So if you take zinc as a preventative dose, you're actually giving your immune system the building blocks. Because in the end of the day, no matter whether you get hydroxychloroquine or not, it's your own immune system actually provides the protective response. And in these viruses, you actually clear the virus, it's called, so that the virus particle, when your immune system works, the virus particle is gone and you're well. So the good news about hydroxychloroquine is it's on the World Health Organization Essential Medicines of the World. It's been approved 70 years ago. It's used in Africa for malaria. It's called the Sunday drug. It can be given to breastfeeding women, and pregnant women, and it can be given to children. And it works very well for malaria and for autoimmune diseases like lupus and arthritis. And it was previously known to work for coronavirus, and it was shown in China to work for coronavirus. So it's one of those. It works for arthritis and lupus. So what was shocking then in January or so is that that it was well known, it was working. And in some countries like France, it was in the newspapers, they gave it to a lot of politicians and the doctors, and then they destroyed the stockpile of hydroxychloroquine. And then in Ireland, they came out and said that doctors couldn't prescribe it. You can prescribe hydroxychloroquine for lupus arthritis the whole time. And then later on, in around May, the FDA said to doctors that they could be struck off if they prescribed hydroxychloroquine, one of the safest drugs in the world. So they could prescribe it still for lupus arthritis, but not for coronavirus, right? And of course, the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons on the 6th of June 2020 are taking a legal case against the FDA because this is the first time ever that a licensed drug for 70 years, one of the safest drugs as well, right? They monitor, has been withdrawn in the middle of a so-called pandemic for treating people. So I'm not sure whether it's allowed in the UK. So a lot of the time, I know in Ireland, you can prescribe it in Ireland for like arthritis and lupus, but there was a kind of a guidance from the manufacturing to say they weren't sure if it was safe, even though it had been published. And then what is undermining, and why people like me are speaking out, this process is undermining the governments, right? Because if you have a treatment, so the combination of nutrition, vitamins and zinc, and things inhaled steroids, interferon, hydroxychloroquine, if you have a treatment and they were given to people who have the symptoms, 99.9% of people will not die, okay? So of course, if you have something then that probably the death, as it now, without treatment in Ireland, we now have 100 verified deaths from COVID in all of 2020. But if they had got treatment, probably all of them would have lived, right? So then that has two questions. And everybody knows this. The publications were known 2003, 2005. It worked in China in January and February. So the doctors, but not what they were not doing was telling people about prevention and food and vitamins, but they were destroying hydroxychloroquine in some countries, and they were saying it used to be available, now it's not available. And then they were doing this lockdown for something that was not necessary. So the politicians and the medical advisors are hyping up something that is unnecessary if they made the treatments available, including prevention by food and vitamins. So it was known to be very rare, right? When they call the pandemic, the chance of dying is 1 in 1.8 million. So that's very rare. 1 in 3 people die of cardiovascular disease in Ireland, 1 in 3 of cancer, 1 in 3. So this is like a very rare, you'd have to be 60 years in Ireland on average when the pandemic called for 1 person to die. There was no basis on the data available to do the lockdown. But the good news is hydroxychloroquine, you can also do it as a preventative dose, 1 tablet a month from October to May. And it seems to also prevent symptoms of other flus like influenza. But of course the most important thing is if you take vitamins and zinc. So it means less people may potentially die now because people are aware that they, can actually boost their immune system. So then the other thing then I was doing when I was speaking out, I was asking for people to help me in Ireland. And I'm saying globally from the beginning that Ireland could actually change this whole thing in the world, right? Because when it's such a small country, when people die, we all know each other, right? So what I was saying is that if there is a treatment available, if the government, they are still reporting over 1,700 deaths from COVID-19, but if there's a treatment available, that we should be looking at all those deaths and asking the doctors, did you give them treatment? Okay? So that means it's preventable, right? So we were then, with not me, but with a group of people, were writing, well I was saying it, that people are writing, so it wasn't me, but they were liaising with me, and they were writing to the doctors, because you can look up at rip.ie, and write to the coroner, so we knew which regions or which shires or counties in Ireland had the most deaths, and we were writing to doctors and the coroners, because they're public officials, to say you have reported, 500 deaths in Dublin or Kildare. Can you, just reminding them that coroners have a duty, it's a legal process, to write the correct cause of death. So if someone had terminal cancer or died of Alzheimer's, then obviously that should be the cause of death. And if they, not. So and the same with doctors, we were just reminding them that it's a legal process and they can potentially be struck off, right? And we were publicly available saying it, so that you could actually go through each of the 1,700 deaths and look and see what happened. So the good news is, on the 9th of September 2020, you can look up cso.ie, search vital statistics, Q1 2020, and you'll see, now I'm going to be publishing, I've written a report for it, but they have now said the number of deaths in Ireland, because we've been, making it known that the number for 1,700 was exaggerated and that doctors and coroners cannot be incorrectly ascribing. And hundreds of people contacted me and said my elderly relative died of Alzheimer's, but on the death cert it says COVID-19. So we have already hundreds of people in Ireland that were willing to do a public inquiry and go through each of those deaths. But on the 9th of September 2020, CSO, Vital Statistics Q1, the number of deaths now that died of COVID-19 in December, January, February, March in Ireland is 0. Yeah, just because, so the first death was in April, right? That meant no death. Now, I'd been emailing as well and they confirmed it. But even though it's reported on the website 1,778, right, on Euromomo and Our World in Data, they now came out and said the number of people, so, it's like testing for the chickenpox or influenza A. All these big numbers that are positive on a COVID-19 test is just that they had influenza, they could have died of something else. So in the CSO, and it's called the HSPC, the Health Surveillance Unit, have come out and said in a table the number of people in Ireland, all 2020, that died of COVID-19 now is 100 in the whole country. 100. But of course what we will be doing now, that only came out last week, is looking up each of those 100 deaths because they were preventable deaths. And if they happened after April, The Zelenko protocol, you know, the Raoul in France were publishing that it was widely available that hydroxychloroquine worked. So those 100 deaths again. So we will be pushing back for the next one. They don't officially do the breakdown of those until November, but we will be making it known. We will be assessing each of those 100 deaths for the doctors, because if a coroner, you know, actually one of those 100 was not COVID-19, because of course if the numbers are low, it doesn't justify the lockdown, and it doesn't justify the elderly being isolated, which there's no need for, and if there is a treatment available, they can be fine. Yeah. So that, but the thing is, because these viruses have similar about the region of, you know, I think it's 1 in half a million, you know, in Ireland under 65, and then it's obviously 92 per million. But if you have a treatment, those deaths are preventable, and the treatments are really effective. So therefore, the good news is there's no real scientific or medical basis for the lockdown. But for the next winter season, which is I think the pharmaceutical industry really don't want, is that hydroxychloroquine and zinc work for any flu immediately, right? So you don't need to wait a year for a vaccine. There's no panic. And it also seems to work for influenza, right, virus, so that you can take a preventative dose of 100 milligram tablet if you're over 65 or you feel you have underlying conditions, and it costs 10 cents to make, and you can usually get it for about 50 cents. It's very cheap. So you then, for other future things, and of course then you don't need to take a vaccine because you've got a safe and effective treatment. But hydroxychloroquine works within 3 hours to 8 hours. So if you didn't want to take the preventative dose once a month, you could just say, well, if I'm, you know, because only maybe 2 in 100 people get symptoms. So if you never get flu symptoms, you don't need to worry. You don't need to be taking anything. Your immune system is actually boosted. But if you are the 1 in 10 or 1 in 50 that do get flu, then you can just have hydroxychloroquine available to you, or ask your doctor, will you prescribe hydroxychloroquine if I need it? And within 3 hours, the symptoms will be reduced. And what I'm saying to people is, if you don't have symptoms and you don't go to hospital, you won't die, right? You don't need to be PCR testing. This is a flu, and the symptoms are, and then there are, which I won't go into, if you have coronavirus contamination from dog kidney in an influenza vaccine, which happened in 2018 in America, and some of those influenza vaccines, if they have this dog kidney with coronavirus, that if the next circulating coronavirus comes, that of the American military